reality and rationalize the systems we live in. For thousands of years, we believed in the divine right of kings. Often, you will find that the dominant ideologies of society conveniently fit the economic interests of those who are at the top of that society's hierarchy. People's own ego. Various myths. We believe in various myths to make sense of reality and rationalize the systems we live in. For thousands of years, we believed in the divine right of kings. Often, you will find that the dominant ideologies of society conveniently fit the economic interests of those who are at the top of that society's hierarchy. People's own egos often play a strong role in maintaining these myths. It's not exactly comforting to realize that so much of what you are taught is nothing but a lie. It is often easier to get people to believe myths than it is to convince them that their way of thinking is already based on myths.
People are dumb.
One of the most common myths in today's political discourse that for some reason still hasn't died out is the notion of the deficit. The narrative that governments need to balance the budget, and that the so-called national debt is an impending catastrophe. There is a lot of unfounded hysteria surrounding the national debt, especially in countries like the United States, Canada, Australia, and the UK. Many people in countries like these still believe that their governments are flat broke and that their budget is unable to tackle some of the most important issues of our time. Whether the policy debate is about healthcare, infrastructure, high-speed rail, education, housing, or a Green New Deal to combat the impending climate catastrophe, the same question inevitably arises. How are you going to pay for it? Where will you get the money? You want people to have homes? How can we afford that? You want to invest trillions of dollars into climate change program to transition to a sustainable economy to mitigate the impending climate crisis? But what about the deficit? How are we going to find the monies? It's not like money grows in the Federal Reserve. I mean, trees. Isn't the US national debt like 12 trillion or 28 trillion or something?
300 trillion.
Won't future generations have to pay back the debt that the government created in its own currency? A lot of people unironically think this way. Even a lot of politicians believe this myth, and the ones who secretly do know that the deficit is just a mythical boogeyman have to keep pretending that it's real. Either because they don't want you to know that you are indeed capable of demanding nice things from the government, or because the deficit myth is already so deeply ingrained into the political unconscious that politicians are scared to challenge it. Sometimes politicians lie about the deficit as a talking point to perpetuate the myth of fiscal responsibility, and use it as an excuse to push for austerity, or shut down progressive policies that their corporate donors won't like. And often the politicians themselves are ignorant enough to actually believe the myth. The deficit hysteria is not just unfounded baloney. It is a highly dangerous myth that holds back human progress. The way that many people talk about the deficit today is comparable to how flat earthers talked about, and still talk about, the sun and the earth before Copernicus. But I feel like many of us intuitively know that there is something wrong with the deficit narrative and the way people think about it, as many of the holes in the narrative are quite easy to spot. Why is the deficit only brought up when it comes to spending on social programs? How come politicians don't ask, how can we pay for it, when they push for multi-trillion-dollar wars, bailing out the banking sector, or giving billion-dollar tax cuts to the wealthy, which all add massively to the deficit? Why do conservative politicians always fearmonger the most about the deficit, despite historically running the most deficits? Hell, even Washington insiders like Dick Cheney admitted that deficits don't matter. Unless you are drinking the Kool-Aid of ideology on the daily, you can easily spot the clear contradictions in all of this. But we are not given the means to articulate it. This video will provide you with the necessary means to absolutely destroy the deficit argument when you encounter it. While many of the deficit hawk talking points could easily be disproved just by old-school Keynesian economics, and many economists today who are not total conservative ideologues usually understand that governments don't operate like households, the main economic school of thought which has by far the most rigorous and encompassing analysis of the deficit myth and how the modern monetary system in general works is what is now called modern monetary theory, also known as MMT for short. Contrary to the dogma spouted by conservative deficit duds and libertarian goldbug fanatics, MMT is not just printing money, and it is not even a prescriptive policy ideology. It's almost misleading to call modern monetary theory a theory because it's really more just a description of how the modern monetary system actually works, based on facts that are very hard to disprove once you understand them. Those who critique it without first actually bothering to engage in the material itself usually do so because MMT invalidates some of their ideological assumptions. While many of the ideas in modern monetary theory are not particularly new and derived from Keynesianism, MMT provides a more well-articulated and updated lens for understanding the modern monetary system, and gets some key insights into the origin of money and taxes from fields that are outside economics as well, such as history and anthropology. Now, I don't want to name drop too many unfamiliar names, but it is worth giving a shout out to the economists most known for popularizing MMT, such as Warren Mosler, Larry Randall Wray, Bill Mitchell, and most recently, Stephanie Kelton and her wonderful book, The Deficit Myth. Key works and lectures from all of these economists can be found in the description of this video for further learning if you are interested, but I will try to give you a concrete picture of the main ideas in this video, so it is accessible as possible. Once you understand the key realities of how the modern monetary system actually works, the mythology surrounding the deficit discourse will be demystified, and you will go absolutely mad trying to watch the backward discourse on the deficit that is so heavily polluted by this deficit mythology. But first, what even is the deficit and the national debt? The deficit is simply a subtraction of two numbers. How much money the government puts into the economy subtracted by how much is taken out of the economy. The national debt is simply the all-time record of how much money the Fed put into the economy minus how much it subtracted out of it via taxation. That's it. The national debt may look scary, but in reality, no citizens are going to have to pay for it, and no one ever will. And that's okay. What matters is not how big the deficits are, but rather who the deficits are benefiting. Is the deficit being used for wars and corporate bailouts, or is it being used to fund things like affordable housing, good quality public transportation, universal healthcare, and tuition-free college? Future generations, if they are lucky enough to survive climate change, won't have to worry about paying off the national debt. But they will have to worry about paying off their private student debt and their private mortgage debt, as well as the impending climate crisis. Coincidentally, conservative deficit hawks don't seem to care very much about any of these things. While this may be obvious if you didn't drink the conservative Kool-Aid growing crisis. Coincidentally, conservative deficit hawks don't seem to care very much about any of these things. While this may be obvious if you didn't drink the conservative Kool-Aid growing up, for most of us we have to unlearn first in order to see the truth. To deprogram the deficit ideology that is so deeply ingrained into the public psyche. So let's demystify it one step at a time. The first step to deconstructing the deficit myth is understanding that governments are not like households. Even though we hear this analogy all the time, we often hear politicians say that governments must get their fiscal house in order, that the government must tighten its belt, and that the government is living beyond its means. This is a completely backward way to think, even though it works as a personal narrative to simplify reality in people's heads. Many people have the tendency to apply their microeconomic thinking of private business and personal households to the macroeconomics of the government and the overall economy. After all, if households ran continuous deficits like virtually all governments do, then most people would be bankrupt. But in reality, governments do not function like households, which should be quite evident unless your brain is swimming in ideology. Contrary to popular belief, governments with currency sovereignty cannot run out of money. I repeat, governments with currency sovereignty cannot run out of money. Even though you probably never thought much about this before, something deep down inside of you intuitively already knows this basic truth. Governments with currency sovereignty are the monopoly issuer of their currency. But just remember that this fiscal freedom only applies to governments that have their own currency and have most of their debt in that currency. Governments with currency sovereignty include the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, China, Japan, and a few others. Keep these countries in mind, because all of what is being said in this video is applicable to countries with currency sovereignty, even though I will be mostly referring to the United States as a primary example, for simplicity's sake, because most people are familiar with US politics. The arguments of modern monetary theory apply to countries like this where the government is the monopoly issuer of a fiat currency, and is not on a gold standard. So this does not apply as much to countries in the European Union who have to use the euro and rely on the European Central Bank, or to countries which do have their own currency but hold much of their debt in a foreign currency, such as Venezuela, Argentina, and Lebanon. These countries do not have currency sovereignty. The notion that governments with currency sovereignty cannot run out of money has become an irrefutable fact ever since most of the world abandoned the gold standard, which was formally abandoned on an international level under Richard Nixon in 1971. But the USA abandoned the gold standard multiple times, most notably in 1933 under FDR. For those who don't know, the gold standard constrained the ability of governments to create currency as an equivalent amount of gold reserves had to be held in proportion to the amount of money stored. Gold is a finite resource, and the gold standard system proved to not make very much sense as governments had to spend more and more to maintain the capitalist system. So the United States finally abandoned the gold standard officially under Richard Nixon, and most other countries did the same afterwards. Ever since then, governments who issue their own fiat currency and impose taxes in that currency, spend in that currency, and issue debt in that currency can never run out of money. The government will always be able to make all payments as they come due, so any payment that it has promised to make, whether it's your social security retirement pay, wars, military spending, government programs, or interest payments to government bonds denominated in its own currency, then the government can always make those payments. The way it used to work is that governments would actually print up that currency or stamp the coins to make the payments. But today it's mostly handled electronically, so it's a bit misleading to say that governments print money. Governments create most of their money virtually, via their central bank, by typing numbers onto a screen. Without boring you with the nitty-gritty details, the way it basically works now in the USA, for example, is that the US Treasury spends by having the Federal Reserve, the central bank, credit the reserves of a commercial bank, and that bank credits the accounts of the appropriate recipients of the government spending, the various actors that the government needs to carry out a certain policy. Voila! Money created on a computer with nothing but a keystroke. While many politicians probably won't admit this, all of the chairmen of the Federal Reserve, the people supervising the money creation, will.
The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money.
There is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve.
We print it digitally, so we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money.
The banks have accounts with the Fed, much the same way that you have an account in a commercial bank. So to lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account that they have with the Fed.
Technically, the central bank is formally considered independent in most countries, but in reality it essentially functions as the government's bank. The government effectively decides what the central bank's objectives are, and of course it finances much of the federal government's policies, by crediting commercial banks and the appropriate accounts to those who need to carry out the policy. This common method of Fed money creation is not to be confused with quantitative easing, also known as QE, which is a less common policy that a lot of people falsely equate with money printing. QE is when the central bank purchases longer-term securities from the market in order to increase the money supply and encourage lending and investments. Now, we don't have time to get into the technicals of QE, but if you want to understand the difference between money printing and quantitative easing, the channel Money in Macro has a really good video about it that I highly recommend. Now, back to Fed money creation. Let's use one more example to illustrate how federal governments with currency sovereignty finance most of their policies. While this essentially works in a very similar way for every country with currency sovereignty, let's take the UK as another example to visualize, just in case you still don't get it. When Parliament approves a budget, Parliament gets the central bank, the Bank of England in this case, to credit the bank accounts of the institutions and the individuals necessary to make that policy happen. And there you have it. Now that the budget has been approved, new money has just been created and entered the private sector. If you still aren't convinced and think that it just can't be so simple, then I would highly recommend checking out the statements from the central banks themselves. The Bank of England, for instance, published a paper in 2014 that clearly outlined this process of how money is created. And you can also find countless statements from those who worked as chairman of the Federal Reserve in the United States, as referenced throughout this video. The proof is in the pudding. By now, an alarm bell in your brain is probably going off. Isn't government spending supposed to be financed by taxation? Where does the money come from? It has to come from the taxpayer, right? Isn't that what taxes are for? To finance government spending? As counterintuitive as it sounds, taxes do not fund government spending. What? Taxes don't fund government spending? Nope. Taxes do not fund the majority of government spending. At least not on a federal level. Local and provincial governments, on the other hand, who cannot create money, do use taxes to finance much of their expenditures, while also relying on federal government handouts to finance the rest, which is usually created by newly created government money via the central bank. But in general, the federal government does not rely on taxpayers to spend money. For the federal government, spending comes first and the taxes come later. The taxes are not to finance the spending. It's the truth that many economists know, and even some politicians know it. But because most of the electorate doesn't know it, political representatives have to keep pretending that it's somehow possible for the government to run out of money. And of course, it works as a quite convenient talking point for politicians to use as an excuse to privatize public assets and social programs.
The state has no source of money other than the money people earn themselves. There is no such thing as public money. There is only taxpayers' money.
Margaret Thatcher is wrong, or flat out lying. Did it ever occur to these squareheads where the money originally came from and who creates the currency? A stubborn conservative might say, well, doesn't the government get all of its money from taxes? According to this logic, there is no public money. There is only people's money, which the government uses. Then the question you should ask them is, where do taxpayers get their money? Well, they earn them through wages paid by their firms that they work at. Okay then, how do the firms get money? Consumers purchasing their products or services with the money that they earn from the firms that they work at. As you can see, if you believe the delusion that the taxpayer is at the center of government spending, then you get into a never-ending cycle that can never explain how the currency originally got into the economy. Hint hint. Check what the banknote says next time you get some dollar bills. It will say Bank of England if you are in the UK, or Federal Reserve Note if you are in America. Take a moment to think about it. If the government really needed your taxpayer money to finance its spending, then virtually every government would not be running continuous budget deficits by always spending more into the economy than it takes out of it. By now, you might be thinking to yourself, if governments don't rely on taxpayer money for federal spending, then what even is the purpose of taxation? Why bother with taxes at all? The answer might surprise you, and you will find out towards the end of the video as seen in the timestamps. But first, let's address the common misconception that government deficits are financed by borrowed money. A common rebuttal to what I have said so far would be, if the federal government issues its own currency and can create money digitally out of thin air, then why does it issue debt in the form of bonds? Doesn't this mean that the government is borrowing our money? Most governments, such as the USA, do allow people to purchase government bonds in exchange for interest payments, which the central bank pays with newly created money. The government coordinates deficit spending by selling an equivalent amount of securities, but it is highly misleading to say that the government is borrowing money, because it isn't relying on borrowed money at all. The federal government is not selling bonds because it needs the dollars. Bond sales just allow holders of reserve balances to trade them in for US treasuries. It's done to support interest rates, not to fund the government. A federal government bond is really just a savings account with the Fed. What basically happens when one purchases a federal government bond is that one is swapping their money from one savings account to another savings account with the Fed. You will never have to worry about whether a sovereign currency issuing government like the United States will default on its debt because it issues that debt in their own currency. The central bank will always be able to continue making the interest payments by crediting the appropriate bank accounts. Federal governments with currency sovereignty like the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, and Japan don't actually need to issue bonds, but they choose to for various reasons. For one, government bonds function as reliable savings accounts with the Fed, where people can collect interest payments. Bonds can be used as a tool to encourage people to save money and not spend it. To clarify once again, the point is that neither taxpayer money or borrowing funds federal government spending for countries with currency sovereignty. The federal government spends first, taxes second, and then chooses to issue debt in the form of bonds with interest, which functions as safe assets for people's savings. The only so-called economists who don't understand this are those whose thinking is stuck in the era of the gold standard and fixed exchange rates. And they have not updated their thinking to the modern monetary system, which uses a fiat currency with a floating exchange rate. While it's really not easy to simplify, if there is one message to take from this video that you should most certainly remember, it is that governments that issue their own currency and issue most of their debt in that currency cannot run out of money and do not rely on the money of taxpayers or bond buyers. Now, while the government can't run out of money, I certainly can. And with pretty much negligible ad revenue on these videos, I will need your help to keep high quality content like this going. And unfortunately, I don't get Al Jazeera money or generous donations from leftist commie billionaires. So if you think these videos are important and give you value, your collective support on Patreon can make all the difference. Now, back to the video. But if governments can't run out of money, then what are the limitations to how much money they can create? Why can't they just deposit each of us a $1 million check? The answer is no. The government cannot print unlimited money. Well, technically it can, but not without serious ramifications. MMT obviously recognizes that there are indeed real limitations to government spending, but they're not exactly financial limitations. The two biggest limitations to federal government spending are number one, inflation, and number two, most importantly, the real resources available in the economy. Let's first look at inflation, because that tends to be what people worry about the most. Inflation is a very multifaceted phenomenon, which would probably require an entire video of its own. But for now, what you need to know is that inflation is caused by multiple factors. Inflation is simply the continuous increase in prices. Most governments usually aim for a stable amount of inflation for a healthy economy, and deflation, in contrast, which is the opposite, is usually a sign of a stagnating economy. But if prices continue to increase too much while incomes stay the same, people's money has less buying power in their own currency, thus leading to a lower standard of living. And when prices increase so rapidly to the point where they're out of control, this is when we get hyperinflation, a very rare phenomenon. Inflation takes shape in different forms. First, there is what is called demand-pull inflation, which is when demands for goods and services significantly outweighs the supply for them. One could argue that demand-pull inflation is one of the multiple factors behind the increase in prices we have seen recently this year, as businesses are increasing prices to recoup lost profits from the coronavirus stagnation, and are capitalizing on the big increase in demand following the opening up of the economy. But this is likely not the main cause behind the inflation we are seeing now. What is more relevant right now is cost-push inflation, the second main type of inflation. Cost-push inflation occurs when there are noticeable increases in the costs of important goods and services where no suitable alternative is available. For example, a serious drought could lead to massive crop failures and food shortages that send prices soaring as supply collapses. Or powerful storms could wipe out oil refineries, causing the prices of energy to spike. Cost-push inflation is often caused by the rising costs in key parts of production, such as oil, raw materials, and transportation costs, which have become very relevant in the age of global interconnected trade. Examples include supply chain disruptions and fluctuations in the price of oil, both of which increase the costs of production and in turn cause the prices of many imported goods to rise. This type of inflation is primarily what is to blame for the price increases we are seeing in many countries at the moment. Contrary to the dogma that conservative hyperinflation hyperventilators will tell you, larger deficits do not automatically lead to hyperinflation. In fact, most of the time they don't even lead to much inflation at all, as real-world evidence clearly shows us. Japan has the highest debt-to-GDP ratio in the world, of about 256% as of 2021, and they have been at the top of that list for quite some time now. Yet for the longest time, they can't even get out of deflation, the opposite of inflation. Let that sink in. This tends to make the brains of deficit hawks absolutely explode, because they haven't accepted two basic facts. Countries that issue their own currency, and most of their debt in that currency, cannot run out of money. And 2, that the cause of hyperinflation is not large deficits. Governments all around the world, including the United States, created insane amounts of new money after the 2008 crash, and experienced little to no subsequent inflation. Governments have also increased the money supply even more significantly during the coronavirus crash, and we have not seen any substantial inflation until recently due to the supply chain disruptions and shortages of important goods. The connection between money creation and inflation is not as clear-cut as many people assume it is. Rare cases of hyperinflation, such as Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Lebanon, and Weimar Germany, are extremely rare and were caused by multiple severe catastrophes in their real economy. And these situations were not helped by the fact that all of these countries owed an insane amount of debt in a foreign currency. For all the interested nerds out there, I have some helpful studies listed in the description if you want to learn more about what exactly caused hyperinflation in these places. Dr. Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth, also has an in-depth chapter on inflation. But the point is that creating more money does not automatically lead to more inflation. And inflation is a multifaceted phenomenon way beyond the scope of this video. Anyone who gives you a short, oversimplified idea or one single cause of inflation is most definitely lying to you. Now, while creating money does not automatically lead to more inflation, government spending does have very important constraints if countries do not have the physical productive capacity capable of producing and consuming an adequate amount of goods and services. As alluded to earlier, this brings us to the primary limitation of money creation, and that is the real economy. There are real limits to the amount of workers that exist who the government can hire to do things, and there is also a limited amount of natural resources available, and each country generally has their own limitations to their productive capacity, aka their economy's internal speed limit. Let's take funding a war as an example just to illustrate. While we should all be against wars, I hope, the libertarian argument that we just can't afford it doesn't really hold up. It's just not a good argument because countries with currency sovereignty can always afford another war, at least nominally. There is a reason why the USA is comfortable spending so much money on the military every year and even spending trillions of dollars on things like the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. The limitations in this case is not the amount of money that exists, but rather how much actual people are willing to fight in that war, how many tanks and weapons are capable of being built, and how much fuel is available to power all of these war operations. The real horror of these wars is not the amount of taxpayer money wasted, but rather the huge loss in real human life that occurred. The US government didn't use taxpayer money to pay for the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and they didn't use taxpayer money to pay for the $1 trillion CARES Act that recovered the financial sector during the coronavirus crash. Same goes for the Obama stimulus package after the 2008 crash. The US government paid for this stuff the same way it pays for most things. It simply gets the Federal Reserve to create money and deposit in the appropriate accounts of the actors needed to make these things happen. If the US government were to implement an ambitious progressive policy like a Green New Deal or a universal basic income, we would simply do the same thing. Here is Warren Mosler, a known MMT economist, explaining how simple this process would actually be.
So when somebody says to me, how do we pay for the Green New Deal? I say, well, Congress appropriates the money, and then the Treasury instructs the Fed to credit the appropriate accounts. And that's how it's paid for. And then the Green New Deal people go, yeah, that. Okay. And there's no disputing that. You can ask anybody in the Fed, yeah, that's how it works. That's how we pay for things. We change the number in the account. Who else said? Well, Bernanke said that. We have the quote. Greenspan said that. We have these quotes from FedChair.
Now the question you have all been waiting for, which I waited until the end of the video to discuss because it is the finding of modern monetary theory that shocks people the most. If governments with currency sovereignty can't run out of money and don't require taxes to finance federal spending, then what is the purpose of taxes? Why do we need taxes at all? The answer might surprise you. Actually, it'll probably make your head explode. There are multiple reasons for taxation, but MMT boils down the role of federal taxation to two core purposes. Number one, governments looking to provision themselves and create demand for their currency. A government needs to find ways to get people to do things for the society that it's supervising. So the government imposes a tax liability that essentially forces people to have to look for work to earn enough currency to pay the tax. By creating demand for the currency and getting people looking for work, the state provisions itself and creates value for that fiat currency, which would have otherwise been worthless. Of course, pegging a currency to gold adds some complications to this, but we left the gold standard a long time ago for a reason, and because governments primarily run on fiat currency now, it makes more sense to describe the modern monetary system that we have now. To clarify once more how governments provision themselves and generate demand for the currency via taxation, let me use the following example that economist Warren Mosler likes to use. Let's say I have all of you watching this video in a room with me, and I offer you one of these tokens to mop the floor for me. Let's call this fiat currency donkey coins. Would any of you mop the floor for one donkey coin? Probably not. How about for 2 donkey coins? Probably not, because they're completely worthless. Now, if I had 2 guards with a machine gun waiting by the door and you had to hand in one of the donkey coins to get out, would you then change your mind? Everybody would, and everybody would try to mop the floor because you would need to in order to earn the donkey coins, as you would need to pay one of them to the guards in order to get out the door. This analogy essentially describes how government taxation works and how it generates demand for their fiat currency. This may sound coercive, but it's essentially the reality of how the state works. The state by its nature always involves some level of coercion. If the state didn't enforce tax collection via law enforcement and agencies like the IRS, then the value of the currency would essentially become worthless. The federal government creates a hole in your pocket with a tax bill in order to get you to need their currency, so that the government can then issue that currency and have users of that currency work and trade for that currency. Most sovereign fiat currencies work this way. The relationship between state fiat currency, tax liabilities, and debt has been well documented in the field of anthropology. The narrative that money tokens spontaneously sprung up free of state coercion as part of a natural market evolution from barter has been debunked many times. Many anthropologists, most famously the late David Graeber, call it the myth of barter. But the origin of money is a complicated topic that we simply do not have enough time. The state by its nature always involves some level of coercion. If the state didn't enforce tax collection via law enforcement and agencies like the IRS, then the value of the currency would essentially become worthless. The federal government creates a hole in your pocket with a tax bill in order to get you to need their currency, so that the government can then issue that currency and have users of that currency work and trade for that currency. Most sovereign fiat currencies work this way. The relationship between state fiat currency, tax liabilities, and debt has been well documented in the field of anthropology. The narrative that money tokens spontaneously sprung up free of state coercion as part of a natural market evolution from barter has been debunked many times. Many anthropologists, most famously the late David Graeber, call it the myth of barter. But the origin of money is a complicated topic that we simply do not have enough time for in this video. Now let's move on to the second main purpose of taxation, to control inflation. Taxes are one of the many methods of reducing inflation by subtracting money out of the economy. This is to control the money supply and to prevent the economy from overheating. And it can also prevent people from hoarding too much money.
Yeah, what a great job that's doing!
Taxes can also serve other smaller purposes, such as discouraging certain behaviors, like sin taxes with things like smoking. Taxes can also be used for moral purposes, reducing inequality. Although the efficacy of taxes on reducing inequality highly depends on the type of taxes and how well they're enforced. Okay, finally, there you have it. Now it should be clear that how are we going to pay for it is not the question we should be asking. It's not the government's digital budget that needs to be balanced, it's the real economy. The only limitations to government spending that we should be concerned with are the real resources in our real economy, and not letting inflation get out of hand. Not only would policies like building good infrastructure and high-speed rail not cause much inflation, but many progressive policies like universal healthcare, pharmacare, and public affordable housing would actually be deflationary, as they would significantly lower prices and the cost of living. But if what MMT says is really true, then how come governments don't embrace it and start using their budget to actually implement policies that optimally benefit their people? They sure seem to do so when it comes to optimally benefiting the rich. On first glance, it might appear that most politicians are either stupid, self-interested, afraid to challenge the status quo, or all of the above. But here is where I would argue that MMT does not have the answer. In my opinion, certain other schools of thought do. MMT is definitely useful for monetary policy, but it does not encompass the power dynamics of different economic classes and the inherent class interests of the state. To see more about class interests and the nature of the state, I highly recommend my videos on the Democrats and the stock market. I also talk about this stuff extensively on my Patreon exclusive podcasts, and my second channel, One Dime Radio, which you should definitely subscribe to if you haven't already. Lastly, if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please leave a like for the algorithm gods and consider sharing it with your friends and family who you think could learn from it. We really need to get this message out there. Lastly, I want to thank all of my patrons. Big shout out to these generous people. Patrons like these make high quality videos like this possible.
This guy got good videos, eh? Damn, 4 months ago, what the fuck? No. Damn, he's kind of cute. I have question.
How to see who is watching your stream or another streamer's stream. And it will only show people that are logged into their Twitch account. Also, do not call out lurkers. Lurkers don't want to be called out. Don't be a dick. Okay, so I'm currently hosting somebody, but if you just click this icon in your stream or anybody else's stream, it will show you exactly who is in your stream. How to see who is watching your stream or another streamer's.
What?
And if you guys just simply want your Twitch chat box right here on the side where you can read it, you can go to the settings in the bottom right, go to the stream tab. You can make sure your Twitch account is linked to your OBS. We click OK. We can go to the docs tab and then we click on chat. And that'll pop up your Twitch chat here in case you clicked on this video for that. And if you guys just simply want your Twitch chat box.
Streamer tip number 1. It's important to stream while you're happy, so I highly recommend to not look at your view count because that will show how you feel in the stream and people will notice. How it works is that you can tick it off by clicking right here on Streamlabs OBS or OBS and you're good. Streamer tip number 1. It's important to stream while you're happy, so I highly recommend to not look at your view count because that will show how you feel in the stream and people will notice. How it works is that you can tick it off by clicking right here on Streamlabs OBS or OBS and you're good. Streamer.
Why your voice crack like that though? Bro, where?
If you guys have the best settings enabled for your stream and you're still getting a blurry stream and it's not crisp and it's not full 1080p 60 FPS, you're doing something wrong, and I'm going to show you what to enable right now that's going to make your stream super crisp. So the first thing you guys are going to need to do is navigate to your settings. So once you guys are in your settings, you're going to navigate to the stream tab, and then down here, check this little box that says ignore streaming service setting recommendations. Now, for Twitch, Twitch recommends a bitrate of 6K for 1080p 60 FPS video. As you all know, that is not enough to get a crystal clear stream. So enable this box, then head over to the output tab and change your bitrate to 8K. This is super important. Do not go over 8K because it will mess up your stream completely and your viewers will have no transcoding options. As long
And if you guys just simply want your Twitch chat box right here on the side.
Today I'm going to show you how to record gameplay using OBS.
How to turn off your viewer account on Streamlabs OBS. You have your chat bar open right here. Here's your viewer account. You just click that little eyeball right there. Viewer account is now hidden. Less pressure makes for a fun time, so that's why I wanted to show you how to turn off your viewer account on.
Okay. Fuck else was I gonna look at? Hey, yes, your boy.
Hello everyone, this is your Daily Dose of Internet. Whoa! The engine on this plane exploded, but the good news is that this plane has multiple engines and was able to land safely.
What? My back hurts now. Whoa! It's like shit.
This is called Karjutsu, and it's a league that has jujitsu competitions inside of a car.
And this tournament is underway, or cranking on the neck, but just enough space here for Rusty to get out of the driver's seat. Rusty's got some good leverage on him here. It looks like we're going to come out of the driver's seat now into the passenger seat.
I wonder what this one does.
I found someone who makes incredible pieces of art made entirely out of Legos. These people in Dubai made the largest Hummer in the world. He doesn't allow anyone inside of his room. I found a company that makes little heart-shaped QR codes that you place on your loved one's gravestones. The code is a direct link to the person's profile that provides more detail about who they were and what they were like when they were alive.
Bitch ass cat.
This moose somehow got stuck floating on this river of ice.
Maybe we're floating.
Oh. I found an artist that can create bags of water made out of glass. That is the end of this video. Are we hoping I found an This moose somehow got stuck floating on this river of ice.
You know, maybe we're the ones floating.
I found an artist that can create bags of water made out of glass. That is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Later.
Whoa. Oh, I gotta watch Philly. Guess we can watch Philly. Hold on, after these brief. Are they here? Yeah. Alright, let's watch. See how fucked
Is that
up
one
they
is
are.
swapping their money from one savings account to another savings account with the Fed. You will never have to worry about whether a sovereign currency issuing government like the United States will default on its debt because it issues that debt in their own currency. The central bank will always be able to continue making the interest payments by crediting the appropriate bank accounts. Federal governments with currency sovereignty like the United
Always
States,
does
the
that.
UK, Canada, Australia, and Japan don't actually need to issue bonds. Is that one is swapping their money from one savings account to another savings account with the Fed. You will never have to worry about whether a sovereign currency issuing government like the United States will default on its debt because it issues that debt in their own
Alright.
currency. The central bank will always be able to continue making the interest payments by crediting the appropriate bank accounts. Federal governments with currency sovereignty like the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, and Japan don't actually need to issue bonds, but they choose to for various reasons. For one, government bonds function as reliable savings accounts with the Fed, where people can collect interest payments. Bonds can be used as a tool to encourage people to save money.
Okay. It fixed it. Show you need to.
This moose somehow got stuck floating on this river of ice.
Maybe we're floating. I got both takes. Nice.
I found an artist that can create bags of water made out of glass. That is the end of this video. Are we hoping I found an This moose somehow got stuck floating on this river of ice.
You know, maybe we're the ones floating. Alright, I gotta fuck with the volume, so I could turn my mic all the way up and maybe this a little bit lower. Wait, I don't know, 15. Up. Yeah. They're over there. This it?
Today we're talking about
This one. No, I've seen that one. Fuck you. I wanted to see this.
Today, we're talking about this Sniper Wolf doxing scandal, though she says she's the actual victim. We've got troubling updates on Hamas and Israel. Poland's hugely consequential election just exposed. We also break down the clown show that was the Dylan Dennis Logan Paul fight, and why many are now pushing for race to be removed from the census. We're talking about all that and so much more on today's brand new Philip DeFranco show. You daily dive into the news, but first, I gotta let you know that the October Beautiful Bastard drop is now live. Click the link in the description, use the QR code, type it out, because this helps support the show. But with that, yeah, a lot of news to break down today, so let's just jump into it. Starting with this Sniper Wolf situation is disgusting, it is reckless, it is dangerous, and
She is so hot. I don't care.
Massive YouTuber, hundreds and hundreds of millions of views each month. She's best known for her cosplay and her React content, and that specific content has gotten a lot of heat over the last year. There's a lot of people saying the React content, it's not transformative. She's just stealing and siphoning content from other people and benefiting from it. And among her many critics, one of her biggest ones is a creator by the name of Jax Film. He's an old school YouTuber. I think he's been on the platform for like 17 years. And over the past few months, he's really highlighted this problem. With that, he's made a ton of videos criticizing Sniper Wolf for her reaction videos, both making fun of her, but also at the same time giving credit to the content that she is reacting to. But then, over the weekend, it escalated from just some internet thing to the real world, with her posting an Instagram story with a poll saying, should I visit Jax Films? He lives 5 minutes away from my shoot. And as it turns out, she wasn't joking, because she ended up posting from outside his house saying, let's talk like adults, Jax Films, and in that showing the exterior of his home. But of course, in this video, we have it blurred out because we're not psychopaths. Now, she ended up deleting those posts after getting backlash, but Jax Films went to Twitter to write, Sniper Wolf just doxed me on her Instagram. Creepy, gross, violating. What you do is disgusting. You steal content and stalk YouTubers. YouTube, demonetize this dangerous, quote, creator, or just get her off your platform. She posted an Instagram story right outside her home and deleted it. In what universe do you think that's okay? In what reality do you live in where you think this behavior is justified? She's no longer a, quote, silly creator that steals content, teehee. She's a creep that stalks and threatens her critics. Nah, fuck that. Time to get her off YouTube. But then Sniper Wolf shot back in a handful of posts on her Instagram story saying his claims are defamation and she doesn't know how to dox, and adding he literally posted his address on Google and said I threatened him and doxed him, and adding this creep has been harassing me for months, then plays victim saying I threatened him when I just wanted to talk to him. I have no ill intention. She also posted a video saying,
this guy's entire channel is just me. Every single video for the past few months has been about me, and it's just like on me. And then his streams, this dude is just like low-key harassing me. Like, should I get a restraining order?
Jack then replying to all this and saying she ends with, should I get a restraining order? Well, one of us showed up to the other's house tonight and it wasn't me, and saying the harassing you claim I've been doing is documenting recent examples of you stealing creators' content, stealing jokes, and failing to provide transformative commentary. Obviously, it struck a nerve, but wow, doxing me was not on my bingo card. There is no reality where you're in the right here. And then regarding the claims that she doesn't even know how to dox, he said, you posted a video tonight of you outside our home for your 5 million plus followers to see, while my wife and I were inside. I can't make it any simpler than that. If that's not doxing, why did you delete it? And all this has unsurprisingly spawned tons of responses online. A few defending her, but largely it seems like people are on Jack's side, and saying things like her saying I found his address on Google was nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to tell her audience, here's where you can find the information. Sniper Wolf is going to get somebody hurt, as well as I don't care if you're a fan of Sniper Wolf or not, Jack did not deserve to be doxxed over what amounts to YouTube drama. Fuck out of here, man. And personally, my opinion here, I used the words in the beginning, I think this is disgusting, it is dangerous, and it is reckless. This is just something you do not do. This crosses a line. In my opinion, when she says there was no ill intent, I just wanted to talk, that sounds like bullshit to me. Or you just want to talk? DM. You posted all this, including the front of his home, publicly. At the very least, this was an intimidation tactic. At the very worst, you were hoping that something escalates. And her posting after all the big reactions to her story, like joking about the incident, saying, we show up to your house, what do you do? I feel like that shows she really doesn't understand what she did was fucked up. Also, that she likely doesn't expect to be held accountable, which is a big aspect of the story, because not only did Jack and others online say she needs to be deplatformed, that was something that Jack reiterated in a video that he uploaded to YouTube. But here's the thing, and YouTube, feel free to prove me wrong. I am 99.5% sure YouTube's not gonna do a fucking thing. And as far as why, it's because she's one of their golden creators. She was even their keynote speaker at VidCon, and they were gushing about her on Twitter. And the truth is, this has gotten to such a point, they can't claim, oh, we didn't see it. And so understand, if there is, as I expect, a lack of an action, that is an action. When you don't send a message, that is a message. And unfortunately, the one that YouTube may be sending here is a dangerous one. But hey, that is a story, some of my personal opinion, and now I pass the question off to you, whether you agree or you disagree with me. What are your thoughts here, and why? And then, over the weekend, we saw a lot happen between Gaza and Israel. Giving a quick update to the numbers, we have the total number of dead across both sides now in the thousands, with more than 1,400 Israelis and at least 2,750 Palestinians killed. What's concerning is that number is already high, and there has a growing segment of experts and activists are calling upon the U.S. Census Bureau to stop categorizing people by race. And this because over the past year, they've invited the public to give feedback on potential changes to the 2030 census, including the questions on race and ethnicity. And so Carlos Hoyt, a psychotherapist and author who consults at schools and universities on the topic, is leading an effort to remove or at least reform that section altogether. Right? And his fundamental point is that race, concepts like white, black, Asian, Arab, etc., are not real in any biological sense. Actually, according to the science, he's 100% right. The overwhelming majority of geneticists agree that racial categories are an extremely weak proxy for genetic variation. And historians have actually noted that the concept of race hasn't always existed, and when it has, it changed repeatedly. You know, some scholars date racism as far back as the ancient world, while others claim it actually is a modern or a late medieval invention. But you see, at least most agree that so-called scientific racism, or more accurately, pseudo-scientific racism, took off in the 18th century. Right, that being the use of supposedly scientific methods to divide people into distinct races, with the idea being used to justify slavery, colonialism, war, genocide, and all that stuff. But for nearly just as long, and especially since the early 20th century, thinkers have pushed back against the pseudoscience. With figures like W.E.B. Du Bois and Franz Boas arguing that race is just a social construct. And over the next several decades, developments in genetics, biology, anthropology, and other disciplines increasingly cast doubt on the concept. That is, until 2003 with the completion of the Human Genome Project, and that really put the final nail in the coffin. And so now people like Hoyt argue that the rest of society needs to catch up to the scientific community and begin begin phasing out race from our vocabulary. But also, unsurprisingly, that proposal has provoked a lot of resistance. Right? You see many left-leaning people accusing people like Hoyt of claiming to be colorblind, basically denying that race has any effect on himself or the world. But there, he counters that there is a difference between being race blind and being racism blind. Right? One recognizes that race itself isn't real, the other denies the existence of racism. Though notably, critics argue that there actually isn't much of a difference. Because even though race isn't biological, we live in a world where it does matter, and there's no escaping that. Right? If someone walked up to you and they were like, the only race I see is the human race, you're like, shut the fuck up. There are different lived realities just based off of things like the color of our skin. Even if race is a social construct, guess what? You live in a society. One where it plays a factor, and so you should keep that in mind. But also with this, the Census Bureau isn't the only institution that critics are going after. I mean, popular ancestry services like 23andMe have been criticized for creating the illusion that race is somehow genetic. With critics arguing that even though it's often used to dunk on white supremacists by exposing their supposedly African DNA, that arguably still reinforces the assumption that race is real. But also you have people saying, hey, what about medical institutions? Where they often ask you to fill out your race or ethnicity on patient intake forms. Isn't that for a reason? But reportedly, when clinicians do that, they're really just using race as an imperfect proxy for other factors that may correlate with certain health outcomes. Which is why you have critics saying that it creates this loop where doctors import pseudoscientific categories into their practice. And then people use that as evidence that those categories are backed by actual science. Or for example, tons of people believe that sickle cell anemia is a black disease, but that's actually not true. Right? While broadly, African Americans are more likely to have it, some African populations don't share that trait, and some in Europe and Asia do. So instead of being a product of race, the disease is actually linked to areas that have high rates of malaria. But then, if you use a different example like college admission forms before the Supreme Court upended affirmative action back in June, things get kind of sticky. Because there, you have supporters of racial categories arguing that without them, we wouldn't be able to identify systemic discrimination. So coming back to the census, that's one argument people give for keeping race on it in 2030. Right? That data is used to devise and fund policies and programs, and to monitor compliance with anti-discrimination laws. Like, for example, challenging racially gerrymandered congressional districts. But there, you have proposing a solution to this in a meeting with Census Bureau officials back in a mock census form that instead of asking people to declare their race, asks, how is this person racialized? And there you have two columns of boxes, one marked by self and one marked by others. But all that said, personally, I will say, I think as long as systemic and full-blown racism is a thing, I think we do need to be mindful of race, even if it is a social construct. That way we can try to deal with it, or at least see inequities at the local, state, and federal levels. But also, I want to pair that with, that is just my opinion based off of my lived experiences, how I see things out there. And this is a deeply complex and divisive topic, so I also want to hear from you whether you agree or you disagree with me. And then we saw a huge political shakeup in Eastern Europe this weekend, with centrist and progressive opposition parties in Poland poised to win big in elections. And if they can work out a deal together, they can topple the current nationalist government. And Donald Tusk, a former prime minister and head of one of the centrist parties, absolutely ecstatic about the wins, proclaiming, we did it, we really did. This is the end of this bad time. This is the end of PIS rule. And that rule has definitely been controversial. I mean, we've talked about it a few times over the years, but the PIS-run Polish government has increasingly passed controversial legislation, much to the annoyance of the EU. Things like restrictions on abortions or establishing LGBT-free zones. I mean, it even led to the EU cutting off funding to Poland over those issues. And so because of stuff like that, many polls consider this to be the most consequential election since their independence from the USSR. And that definitely showed in their turnout numbers, with 73% coming out to vote.
USSR.
The end of communism. Is that even if a coalition government is formed, it doesn't mean that conservative politics still aren't popular there, because the PIS still won probably like 200 out of the 438 seats. So as a single entity, they are still the biggest party. Also, I say probably because the official count isn't done until tomorrow. And that's without mentioning the way Poland allocates seats. It's a complicated mess based on proportional amounts of votes and passing a certain threshold. So technically, we won't know for sure until tomorrow. Right now, everyone is treating the tentative results as the likely outcome. Also, important to note, domestically, this could signal a big shift in Poland, but also internationally, some major things are unlikely to change. Right, with one of them being Poland's biggest international concern right now being Russia and the ongoing war in Ukraine. Considering Poland's long animosity towards Russia due to multiple invasions, it's unlikely they'll change their stance to suddenly become pro-Russia. So for partners like Ukraine, at least that'll remain a constant. And then, let's talk about yesterday, today, where we take a look back at the last show. We covered a lot of news. We dive into those comments and see, what are y'all sounding off on? What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? What are your experiences? The story that easily took over the comment section had to do with the whole Tim Ballard Sound of Freedom scandal. Sexual abuse allegations and that lawsuit. And that's just in addition to the other crazy aspects of the story. And there we saw people sharing things like, the Sound of Freedom story and controversy only makes me sad. Sex trafficking of all kinds is a very real threat, and while recognized, seems to be an open secret. Then you have self-righteous men like Ballard coming out to use the issue to brighten their own star. My hope is we criticize these people who take advantage and exploit these issues while also continuing to help those currently suffering in silence and those survivors who need it. So I'm saying the Sound of Freedom thing is so frustrating because most of it was known before the movie even came out, and it was largely ignored because of the push for, quote, Hollywood elites don't want you to see this. Another of y'all saying, this story basically reaffirms my belief that anytime someone self-promotes themselves as the morally good, heroic type trying to make a difference will always end up being revealed as absolute pieces of garbage. Some of y'all also sharing your own experiences. People saying things like Sound of Freedom was presented to me as some fundraiser that the person claimed was more important than the charity I did for a veteran-owned and operated group that actively helps other veterans with mental health. The person wanted me to buy tickets for those who can't afford it. No, they wanted to fudge numbers, have a go-to. I said I don't do scams and block them. As well as another reading, I worked in a faith-based anti-trafficking organization. We focused on adult women, working closely with law enforcement. Instead of bursting in dramatically, we would offer friendship and support, as well as the knowledge that they could call us anytime and be given a place to sleep and financial support. And adding, the people working were largely former trafficking survivors, so it was run much better. Watching the story about Ballard was sickening. God calls on us to serve, not use victims to puff up our ego. And that is where your daily dive into the news is going to end today. But remember, for more news you need to know, I got you covered right here. You can click or tap.
Y'all are all fucking nuts in my book.
As always, my name is Philip DeFranco. You've just been filled in. I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here for more news tomorrow.
Let's check out some of these guys, eh? Oh shit, boy, someone.
Holy shit.
That Pharaoh did have a bunch of cash.
Oh, this LTV is sick. What do you think about MW3? I'm very excited for it.
Is that a new one? Or is that only a night?
The movement feels a lot better.
Oh.
Yo, get your tabs. Get your tabs, everyone.
Could you guys wait real quick?
Oh yeah, I have the money. Oh my god. I'm okay, I'm okay. This guy, close by.
Should I go loadout or land on you guys?
I need a little more money for plate,
I'm gonna go load
plate
out,
box.
you guys. I don't have shit. I'm coming right to you though.
Here, oh.
You can zip up and just
There you
fly
go.
off. I'll do it.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Nice cars, bro. GG.
W.
Oh,
As it
thank
goes.
you.
Oh, you can legitimately kill them.
Oh yeah.
Like Scooby-Doo from the island.
We finally showed the new SUV we just got this morning.
It's a badass.
It's on Twitter.
Lilith looks fucking hot in this bitch.
We got a 2024.
Just don't like when you have like. I just want a running gun, bro. I don't care about missions. Are they collecting anything? The song.
I wish they.
Oh, she was on
made
Bondo.
1440p monitor and 24 inches. So they actually like.
Oh, they
actually,
did.
Like cannot make a 1440p monitor in 24 inches because the pixel density would be just completely wrong. Like it wouldn't. It just wouldn't. It wouldn't work from like a technical standpoint. He's dead. Because like when 1440p monitors were first becoming popular,
There's a team right here.
I was saying the same thing. Like I wish.
Find the right side as well.
I wish there was like a 24, 25 inch like 1440p. Oh, coming up the hill here.
Face down on the side, man.
Yeah.
Is that the whole team?
I think it's just two. I knocked one.
Nice.
Squad wide. Let's go, guys. W.
You have a Logitech
There was a
G5 with
team
you right
going into
now, but
oil.
it's wired. But I want a wireless one, but I have larger hands.
God damn.
Okay, no,
I
it's
didn't
a
know
block
I'm
handler.
playing
The new
anymore.
glorious mice are actually.
What?
I woke up really
Oh
early
my
for
god,
this.
bro, just fucking
A
show
little bit
me.
of that drizzle action.
Sweet and spicy jam and mambo sauce are on the McDonald's menu for a limited time. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
I should minimize this shit and I show ads on this. I don't know. The fuck's all that noise? Fuck is this? Why not? Bro, am I tripping? Where's Warzone? It's not warfare. Oh, stupid. I don't know if I feel like even playing, bro. I'm fucking tired.
Are veterans, like, you know, veterans of the original Zionist militant brigades and they talk to the veterans that are alive to this day. They even talk to a fucking British police officer, as a matter of fact, which I thought was very interesting. And they talk to the Palestinians. They talk to the Jews that were there.
I'm tired. It's only 6.
Committed, some of which has been declassified, but many of which is still not declassified by the Israeli government. and it's very good.
If I get
It's
off,
a
what
very
can
good
I do?
documentary.
Watch a movie, maybe?
Highly recommend you all watch it. Like I said, 1948 Creation and Catastrophe. I think the reason why I like it especially is because like it. Thank you, Sam, for all the cover you've been doing these past week. You don't realize how important it is for us Palestinians, especially in the West Bank. Yeah, of course.
Said, yeah, of course.
But yeah, it's a great documentary. It's very sad, but it's a great documentary nonetheless.
Day we play. Fucking sit right. Oh fuck! I didn't even. Goddamn. Stretch. Hurry up. Wait. Oh. Bro, what the fuck? Just fucking download, bitch. Damn, what the fuck? Give a fuck about. Update, bitch. It's crazy. I'm not even gonna play that shit. Swag as fuck. 5 minutes. What the fuck? Bro. No, wait, no 5 minutes.
anything that the Hamas or the Islamic Jihad brigades have. There's no power in Gaza, okay? There's no power in Gaza, which is deliberate, which is by design, so that, the Israeli forces can control the narrative pretty aggressively. And even then, some doctored video and audio is going to come out. The Prime Minister is going to come on and make a video claiming it's undeniable proof that the IDF would never strike civilians because it's not the rules of war. The IDF controls all forms of media coming in and out. There's no electricity and internet inside of Gaza. Except for the fact that, you know, one video did get out. And that video very clearly shows that it is a giant missile. It is not a rocket, but it is a giant missile. But you can tell by the number of dead. Yeah, it was a rocket. It was a piece of the Hamas rocket. You see it blow up in the sky and pieces scatter. Brother, please, I urge you to exercise a little bit of critical thinking. A rocket that was intercepted is not capable of doing that damage that you saw. Fucking, oh my God. Why? Why are you so quick? No, that video is not debunked. The video that they're showing, there were some videos that were debunked that Israel themselves posted and then deleted. But the potential that it also hit ammo, that is not what it looks like when it hits ammunition, okay? Ammo hidden at the hospital, that is insane. That's not how that works. A piece of artillery, like a fucking, a shell off of a fucking bomb that was intercepted falls directly into ammunition that is just hanging out at the side of the fucking garage, at the side of the hospital, that blows up with one explosion and not multiple. That's crazy. Exercise a little bit of fucking critical thinking.
What a dumbass. What the fuck? That's not what happens when you hit ammo, bro.
I mean, there are plenty of fucking people. I don't care about this. Look, there are plenty of smart people who looked at the death and the destruction that Hamas rocket potentially caused and realized it can't be a fucking Hamas rocket that was misfired, because there has never been a Hamas rocket that has been able to kill 500 people.
Bro, I don't feel good. I think I'm gonna call it.
The payload of
I think I'm gonna call it. The boys, we'll be back tomorrow with full fucking energy.
It was flying are very similar
Fiend.
to JDAM.